morning. This is Chris from Artistic Artifacts. We're here today to talk about cut straight, sew straight. So I've got some tips and tools that I'm going to share with you. Beforehand, I wanted to say that Caitlin and I are here. She's behind the camera, so this is a new one for her, and she's also a new sewer, and she's soaking up everything that we teach and we show in here, so she might get caught up in what I'm showing today. I actually caught her yesterday on the Bernina B790 Pro, the new one, and she was doing some machine embroidery, and it's like I wouldn't even touch that machine, and she was on a go girl. So we expect to see great things from her, and maybe one day she'll be behind the on this side of the camera instead of filming. So thanks, Caitlin, for doing this today. Judy and Kyle are both off. So today I want to talk about having the right tools to in your quilting that make your life a whole lot easier. When I started making samples here, if somebody came into the shop and said, I don't know how to sew, I can't sew a straight line, I'm like, no problem. I can't cut or sew a straight line, and I'm making samples. It's the end product that is really important, which is absolutely true. But there are tools that can make it easier for you to cut a straight line and to sew a straight line. So, I mean, now to me, it's very satisfying when I see how straight it is, when you've pressed right, you've cut right, and it's by using the right tools. And I would say the right tools are the best tools that will fit your sewing space. So the cutting mat I have on the table today is actually awesome. If I had space, I would be in my sewing room. It's 28 inches by 58 inches. If that fits, I mean, we've got it on a 6-foot table. Give us a call, or actually better yet, send an email to sales@artisticartifacts.com, and we'll talk to you about the price and order it for you. But I have, in my sewing room, I have a 24 by 36. It works for me. I have a 570 machine, a Bernina 570, because that size works for me. So there's lots of bells and whistles that you can get, but if your space is too small, it's not going to work. So first off, I'll talk about rulers, and it's important to use the right rulers. And how I got to where I was doing cutting straight lines and sewing straight lines was using the Stripology ruler. So many of you know Gudrun from GEDesigns. I mean, she teaches absolutely fabulous. She's got great YouTube. She's got great social media presence. She's very, very good at teaching. And what she has designed are 4 different rulers that make your life very easy. And again, have the ruler that fits your space. So the first ruler was the Stripology squared ruler. It's 12 inches by 12 inches. And it has lots of options, lots of things that you can do with it. It's got angled lines. You can square the whites. You can turn it up. You can square different blocks. So that was the first one we got. And then we got the Stripology Squared Mini. Pretty much the same thing. It's got 1-inch, half-inch cuts, and then it has markings. If you turn it around, it has 1/4-inch cuts. So again, if you're squaring up, this is a 5.5 inch. It's very useful, very functional, and one of the things that in her latest book, which we just got, is she tells you for each of these rulers what they can do and how you can use them, the difference in the rulers. And personally, from reading this, from my own experience, I would say you don't need all 4 rulers. This book actually explains to you ways that you can use. If this is the ruler you have, is the Stripology Square Mini, here's how you use it. If you choose to have the Stripology XL, here's how you can use it. I think 2 of them are good, to have one of the small and one of the bigger ones, but her book is very well done, and it has actually the QR code that takes you right to her videos. So let's talk about the 2 that I use. So the first tool I use is the Stripology XL ruler, and it has many, many features. Let's see if this helps to look at the details of it. That's on something. So it's not a grid on a grid. So if you're cutting 1.5-inch strips, you just see the stars. That goes all the way along. It's 1.5-inch strips. If you're cutting 2.5-inch strips, you use the blocks. The nice feature with this is you can cut, if you're cutting 2.5-inch strips, you can cut a lot of strips without moving the ruler. So if I was cutting 2.5-inch strips with one of these rulers, I probably got the worst ruler I could have gotten, because but if I was cutting 2.5-inch strips, I'd cut my strip, and then I'd have to move it, and then I'd have to move it. So each time that I move it, there's a chance that it would be a little bit off. Or if I'm cutting a longer strip, and I'm on a high table today, but if I was working at a regular surface and I go to cut a longer strip, there's a pretty good chance that my ruler is going to move. The Creative Grids ones have a gripper on the back so that it doesn't move, and you have to move it less than if you were. The other tool that I use, and I don't know that I had the sample here, but are the GEDesigns stickers. And what I've done is I've actually marked the pattern that I'm working on, where it tells me where I'm supposed to cut. And so when I go to cut, if I'm cutting a whole lot of blocks, I don't need to refer back to the book every time, or if I walk away or whatever. I've got it marked in here as to which blocks. The other feature that I like is the fact that a lot of patterns are called for 10-inch squares or 2.5-inch pre-cut strips, and if you don't have those in your scraps, or fabric comes in a fat quarter bundle, how do you translate those into what you need? So all of her books, the one I'm using today it says it's made for 10-inch squares, 5-inch squares, 2.5-inch strips, and the ruler. But there's the ways you can calculate what you need. So I'm making the lap quilt of this coral, and I'm using the connections from Wyndham. And do you think I like those colors? As soon as we saw this when the rep was here, I was like, oh, we're getting that one. So I have marked on my book what I need to cut. So I need 10-inch squares. I need assorted 10-inch squares. I went ahead and cut all the fabric in 10-inch squares. And to do that, using this ruler, I'm going to put it at the 1/4 inch. So there's a 1/4 inch mark. Here's the 0, and there's a 1/4 inch dotted line. I'm going to put it up there, and the reason I put it there is to cut off if it's not even. And this one definitely is not even. I line up my fold along the 0 line. I take my rotary cutter, and I cut to make sure it's straight. I'm going to cut at the 10-inch. And my rotary cutter fits right into that groove in the ruler. So I've done a 10-inch, fabric. This is my fold, so I need to make sure I'm cutting off my fold. And this is my selvage, so I want to make sure my selvage, this selvage I noticed was, oh, this one doesn't show, this is a smaller, but the selvage on a couple of the pieces in here were pretty large, so you really need to be careful in that. Make sure that's not in your 10-inch square. I'm cutting off that little bit. So now I have two perfectly cut 10-inch squares. And for every fat quarter, you're going to get two 10-inch squares. And somebody's going to say, well, there's a lot of leftover fabric, because what about the other 8.5 inch? Well, I'll show you. I actually am making two different projects with the leftover 8.5 inch. You can make 5-inch squares with it. You can cut it into 2.5-inch strips for a strap. So you're not wasting fabric. You're just using the fabric you want to use that doesn't come in a design roll. So the next thing is, this says to take that block, and using the 0, you're going to cut the 3.5, the 6, and the 9.5, which is what I put here with the green. So I've got the green here telling me what I need to cut. And then sew them together. So the skinny one, so you do it, sew them together, and then I'm going to cut this one at the blue marks. So I've already marked my ruler at the blue marks to show me how to cut it. Again, just in case my edges weren't right, I put it at the 0. I'm doing blue lines just to make sure. Okay, then I have all my pieces, so I've gone through all of those. So that's what these are. Step is that you cut this fabric, which is my background fabric, to 8.5 inches. So I'm taking my background fabric, and this is actually, so I'm taking my background fabric like this. It's my yardage. And again, it shows you how you can cut. I need 8.5-inch strips. So I cut 8.5 and 17. So now I have the strips I need to make the background. And this, for the background, for this one, I chose a Deer Stella Moonscape, because I think it picks up lots of the kind of peachy color that's in many of the fabrics. All right. And then from this, I need to cut 1.5-inch strips. And I don't need to mark the 1.5 inch because that's already marked with the stars on the ruler. And if you know your math, you're going to know how you go along anyway. And I can get one more out of there. So that's a whole lot easier than cutting those strips individually. And then you sew them together. and you end up with your blocks. And because I've squared them off on the ruler, when I go to piece them, they're all the same size. So it makes it a whole lot easier to sew them together. And the nice part about this pattern, it's called Coral in the Stripology Mixology book, is for these, you don't have any matching seams. But the nice part about Gudrun's books and her patterns is she does tell you how to press. So she'll tell you to press away from or towards the background or away from the background. So then when you've pieced it, you're not only have you sewn straight lines, but you've also it'll lay much flatter when you're ready to quilt it. Any questions?
Lots of positive comments. Someone said that the ruler really didn't move at all.
It doesn't.
And someone was asking about the fabric line, but Sharon answered.
Okay.
And so I showed it again.
Yeah, and we have yardage of that. So it's really,
it's
gorgeous. You saw some of the pieces, but I mean, look at this. So the other thing with a bundle this big is when I first got it, I thought that I might take like these and make one project using just the blues and the greens, or the peaches and the pinks. So you don't need to use the bundle all in one project.
Someone's asking about your rotary cutter.
I use an Olfa 45 millimeter. And the 45 millimeter one fits really nicely into the ruler. So I think that's a true advantage. The other thing that, there's the ruler stickers. So they're Easy ruler stickers, and we have them in 2 different colorways. And so there's three different colors in each pack. So like I did on this, up on my pattern, I was putting different marks on the ruler based on what part, so I could use different color stickers. This book, actually I like this, that she tells you if this is the size strip that you're cutting, here's the first cut that you make, and then here's the second cut that you make. I just need to look one thing. So
I do have a question that might help everybody. I don't want to interrupt that. Catherine Miller not only asked what rotary cutter you were using, but when do you know to change the blades? And please don't say that when they're dull. So
okay.
You have some insight for that.
Yes, I do. Because I just changed mine the other day. So when I am cutting, there's definitely a different sound if you're cutting through the fabric, and when it's not cutting all the way, I do 2 cuts. So I go back a second time, but that's usually when I need to change the thing.
When mine starts skipping, I immediately go and change it.
You know,
it's like,
I'm
nope.
going along cutting, and I go to pull them up, and they're still stuck together. But I can hear the difference when I'm cutting through, especially if you're doing like, I mean, I might be cutting through 6 or 8 layers of fabric. And so you've got to have a sharp blade, and you can hear the difference when you're cutting. So I'm going to cut, this is going to be the binding because I like striped bindings. And I'm going to cut, instead of 2.5 inches for my binding, I'm going to cut 2.25 inches. And I actually turn this around so I can see where I'm supposed to be cutting. And the first time I did this, I'm like, this doesn't make one bit of sense to me. But then they were all the right size. I was like, oh, this is so cool. Okay, so the first cut, I'm doing along my 0 line, and then it says I'm going to do 4.5, 9, 13.5, and 18. 4 1/2, 9, 13 1/2, and 18. Okay, and then I'm going to move my ruler 1/4 inch, slide the ruler to the right, lining the ruler to the 1/4 inch line. So I slid it to the right, lined it up against that 1/4 inch line again. I haven't moved the fabric and I haven't lifted the ruler. And I'm going to do at 2, 6 1/2, 11, 15 1/2, and 20. And my fabric wasn't wide enough to do the 20. And there's my 2 1/4 inch strips to do my binding. Oops, didn't do enough pressure here. That's pressure related, that's not cutter related, because I just changed my blade. Now, how easy was that?
Wow.
Gonna have you quilling yet, Caitlin? All right. So that is a lot of the XL ruler and making a large quilt. So the nice part with the new ruler, which is the Stripology Quarters Mini, is it has 1/4 inch cuts on the ruler, and the other rulers don't have that. So let me, where's my fabric again? So it's got 1/4 inch. And then if you turn it over, it's got equal marks on both sides. So if you're cutting a strip that's 2 1/4, you lie it down and you're going to cut right on each side. So you're not moving your ruler at all. And I'll show you. The benefit of this, and I showed these when we had our comments sold, I was using the curvy log cabin trim tool, which is not a Stripology ruler, but what it calls for is a precise 1 1/4 inch square and narrow strips that are 1 1/8 to 1 1/4 inch wide. So I was actually able to cut my strips to that width with the new ruler. I would have had a little bit more difficulty with the one is to cut that small with the large ruler. This was much easier to handle. It was also easier to square up my the squares afterwards.
What book do you recommend to start with Stripology rulers?
Actually, I think this new one is awesome because it tells you how to cut in different increments. If you're cutting in 1/4 inch increments, using which different rulers. So if you're using the squared mini, if you're using multiple, so she, excuse me, this is really outlined that way. She also talks about to trim your block, so you're ending up with a completely square block. How to trim with using each ruler. And there are some patterns in here. So there's how to do half square triangles, how to do 1/4 square triangles using the different rulers. And she's got some very easy patterns. So it's really a nice way to try some different things. And again, she's using different rulers and telling you how to use them. So I think this is a very good starting point. I think any of her books or her patterns, I mean, I think we have 4 of her books, and we've got a whole lot of patterns. I mean, I choose to go with, so this is the one I'm using. I mean, this was, you saw what I was cutting. This one to me is a little bit more complicated to start. and I look at that in the same way. I've made this one several times, and that's an easy one to make. And then this one is this is the JoJo pattern, and this is in the Stripology Mixology. And I'm going to show you how to do a little JoJo. Oh my goodness, I'm going on and on today. So I'm going to show you how to do a little JoJo, but this is an easy pattern as well, and it's using 10-inch squares. We have this fabric in a kit to make the larger size. This is the crib size. We have it to make a lap size. So you could buy the fabric. You don't need to make a selection. We've even included the backing in that.
Someone asked if you could show how to trim a block again.
All right.
Or if you could just put it in the ruler and show how you turn it and what length.
Well, actually,
you cut
so
out
if I
for
wanted to make this into a different square, a different size square.
Okay.
So this is a 10-inch square, and let's say I wanted my pattern called for an 8.5-inch square. So I'm using this side, I'm using the white. It's got an 8.5-inch square, 8.5-inch square. So what I would do is I would cut up the 8.5-inch square. I would turn the ruler once and cut 8.5-inch again.
Do you use your Stripology ruler more than a regular ruler to cut strips?
I only use my Stripology ruler to cut strips. I can't think of, I mean, I do use my 6.5 by 24 for some things, but this is the ruler that is on hand most of the time. All right. So I'll do this quickly because I did want to show a little bit on the machine why it's important to have straight cuts. But this is a Little Mia pattern. It's a new pattern that we're getting it. We have it on pre-order. We got a sample of it to make a sample, and this is using an Australian charm pack and the mini ruler. So when I went to make, obviously I had leftover fabric. I went to make, and I thought, well, this is very similar to the little JoJo, which is just a miniature version of the big JoJo.
People are asking 2 or 3 questions about the fabric behind you.
It's called Prairie Song by Leslie Tucker Jennison. We have some yardage left. We've got it in design rolls, the 2.5-inch, and we have some fat quarter bundles. And we have a kit to make this, so that you could actually buy the kit, and it has all the fat quarters that you need, and the backing, and the binding, which most of our kits don't include the backing.
Yeah.
So I decided to see how I could translate the markings on the new mini ruler to make the little JoJo. And again, it's just showing you how, if you don't have, this was using the mini squared ruler, but if you have the new ruler, it says it has to be 1 3/4 inches. So I have some squares left. You line it up on the white line, which is the center line. You line up the tips of your ruler there, and then it's 1 3/4 and 1 3/4. So again, I've marked that, but I don't need to turn the ruler around to to cut the strip in the middle. So I have my triangles. And then you turn this, and for this it said when you turn it you need to have 1 3/4 inches from the point, and then a 1 3/4 inch block. So I marked my 1 3/4 on here with the blue. That's why I have the blue on there. I line up my 0. I do my 1 3/4, and lo and behold, there's a 1 3/4 square here. So all I had to do was move the ruler to that 1 3/4 line that I already cut, and I cut one more line, and I have my square. In this pattern, what you do, it's kind of like a stack and whack. So you take this square goes here, and it's going to go here and there. Okay. And then what you're going to get, and she again tells you how to press, is you're going to get your squares. And she also in the pattern tells you half of them need to be pressed in and half need to be pressed out. And that's when, so when you put your squares together, if they do butt up, your seam is going to be flatter. And so let's go to what helps to make it easy. Now that I have straight seams, the tools that I use at my sewing machine, in addition to my machine, I've got my 97D, it's a patchwork, dual feed foot on. I highly recommend having a sew study table. One, it's flat. Your extension table on your machine always isn't flat, but it also gives you some extra room to work on. So when I'm doing several pieces, I can lay them out here. But the nicest feature about it is I'm going to sew these two together. Because I've pressed it, they butt up nicely. I put this right up to, I've got the single hole plate on. I put that right up there. I drop my feed dog. And this is right along the 1/4 inch line. So I don't have to watch where the needle's going. I just watch this line here. It's got a 5/8 inch, it's got an inch, so depending on what size seam you're doing, but it makes life a whole lot easier. Woo! Oh, I knew that would happen. All right, you get the, it never fails. But those are the tools that I use. I really don't know how I would work without these. I mean, there is a ruler on your Sew Steady table. So it has some of the same features, but I think, and this just peels off, I think having this line here makes it just so much easier to watch. When you're sewing, that you're focusing down here and not at your needle and where it's going. All right. And then the very last thing I have is, because we just got a new pattern in that I'm getting ready, project number 5, this one that hasn't been done, is actually, this is a new pattern, Strip to Shore, that we just got. And it's actually hexagons. It uses 2.5 inch precut strips, But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this Happy from Carrie Bloomston and other Wyndham fabric, and I'm going to cut strips. And when I figured out I need 39 strips, the bundle has 24 prints, so I need strips, more strips than that. And one of the things, again, when you're using fat quarters, you need to cut 2 strips, 2.5-inch strips to make 1 strip width of the fabric. So I will need 4 strips of 15 fabrics and 2 strips of 9 fabrics. But what I would like to do is just cut all of the strips at 2.5 inches, and then I've got I can piece the backing. I can use the extras for something else. And I think I showed you this before, but if I'm cutting, I've got several layers. I've got 4 fabrics here, so I'm cutting through lots of layers.
Catherine's asking who the Happy line is by.
It's by Wyndham, but it's Carrie Bloomston is the designer. She's actually awesome. She's written the book Creative Sparks. She's I think it's middle school art teacher, and any student that takes a class from her, I mean, they have to be inspired her life. She's just got so much energy and so many ideas, but it's a really fun line. But I'm doing 2.5-inch strips, so I trim my edges, and I'm using the square. So I needed 4, and you can tell I should have used 3 strips, or what I'm usually doing if I'm doing this, and I'm lining it back right up to my zeros. So I just go back, because I've got those on folds. I usually do like a couple cuts. And you can tell the difference if you can hear it. See, that didn't cut all the way through. And that's the same sound I get if I'm cutting fewer pieces of fabric and my ruler's dull. Oops, I missed one strip. All right, any more questions? Okay, we have just a couple of announcements. We have indigo dyeing and a dye day with Judy next weekend. We have our classes with Seth after, who is coming September 8th, 9th, and 10th. The classes on Saturday and Sunday have sold out, but we're going to have a fun evening after hours here in the shop, shopping, some discounts, and then a lecture by Seth, who will talk about the inspiration behind his new Free Spirit fabric line storyboard. And Seth's actually sending us a little bit of his fabric this week, so we should be able to do a preview. So look for that, and then we have plans for a Creative Quest weekend in October, and we'll have more details on that, but that should be a fun weekend in the shop. So thank you for joining us today. I hope you learned some tips and tricks and found some tools that will help you in your own sewing. Thank you.